it's Penny Black and Jill Foster here for another PB&J card class. And in today's video, we will be making this fun card. This would be a great card you could give to anyone for Valentine's Day, but also anytime you just want to send someone a hug and some love and just because card in the mail. So real quick before we begin, I'm going to just pop up a complete supply list here on screen, but I will put this back up on screen at the very end of the video. So if you want to take a closer look at that time you can just hit pause and see all the supplies that I'm using in creating today's card. So today's card features our miniature 3x4-inch transparent set called So Much Love. This set is a really great value. There's a lot of different types of cards that you can make with it. And today we're going to be stamping and coloring and doing some fussy cutting with the image. So to begin, I am stamping this using memento ink onto, I'm actually using a 110-pound heavyweight white smooth cardstock. And I love when I'm fussy cutting to use this heavier cardstock. It just adds some extra oomph to the overall design when the elements are added back onto my card. I stamped it a few times so that I could get a nice dark impression with that memento ink. I am coloring this using my alcohol ink markers, so a combination of Copic markers and Shinhan Art Touch Twin markers. They're very similar style of markers. If you just use Copics or the other kind, it doesn't matter. I have listed all of my colors that I've used at the very end of the video in that supply list. I'm coloring using my typical technique. I like to start usually with my darker color first. I feather that on, blend it with my mid-tone, and on these balloons I actually used a combo of 4 colors. I'm going to speed through the coloring but keep it all in here for you, so I will be back very soon here once the coloring is complete. I'll turn on a little music for you. All right, once I was done coloring that in, I did do my fussy cutting, and I just wanted to show you here one tip. If there's any sort of interior sections like there are here with these balloons, it's really not difficult to cut these out. I just use an X-Acto knife, and I'm sure to do this before I actually cut out the entire image itself. It's much easier to work with the X-Acto knife when you've got that whole piece of paper there. And I just try to do straight line cuts as much as possible, and then you can just pop those pieces right out. There's just a couple on this image. Now, after I cut everything, I use the brush tip of a memento marker in Tuxedo Black to just go around the edges of my images. And this will hide any imperfections in your cutting. If something is just kind of hard to cut and it's bugging you, just skip it or cut it off. And when you go around with the marker like this, nobody will ever know. I did not worry about cutting out the strings to the balloons. I'm just going to draw them on with a fine tip marker a little bit later on the card making. So I did this for the balloons and then also on the dog. Now I'm ready to work on my background, and for this I'm using our Hearts Galore creative die. This is such a fun die. I love the movement, sort of excitement that it adds whenever you use it on your cards. I went ahead and just laid that onto my panel and die cut that. And I'm starting with a light turquoise cardstock here, and then I'm going to ink this. And by starting with a piece of light colored cardstock, it's just a little bit easier to apply the layers of ink. You don't have to work as hard to get a smooth blend to your lightest color because you're already starting out with an entire sheet of paper with that color. You also don't have to apply as many layers of ink. So for mine, I'm using the Wendy Vecchi Make Art Blendable Die inks. I chose these inks because I just especially really love the colors. I'm using Bluebird and Cornflower Blue for the sky, and then I'm also going to use Fern Green on the ground for my little hill there in the corner. Something to be careful of, which I ran into when I was inking this, is if you're using sort of a thinner piece of colored cardstock, it may wrinkle on you when you're applying it with your sponge applicator tool. So just be a little bit more patient and have a softer hand than I did. Luckily, that little fold there was where the balloons were going to go, so it wasn't a big deal on this card. I certainly didn't want to start over after that happened. Now this is just a piece of smooth cardstock. It's the same cardstock that I used for stamping and coloring my image, and I'm putting the fern green color onto this. I just start off the edge of my papers and work my way on, typically with a circular motion, and that gets a nice even blend of color. I did that same technique for the sky and then also this little hand trimmed hill. Now, before I start assembling this all together, I'm going to stamp my sentiment. This is from our new transparent set called Love Sentiments, and I'm using just a little part that says sending you love, but you can see there are so many really great sentiments included with that set that would work well with this dog and balloon stamped set as well. So I'm inking this using Acorn Mini Archival ink. Chose this ink because I really like the color. It is nice and dark, but not quite as stark as stamping it with black. And I like to stamp this in my stamp positioning tool just in case I don't get a good impression right away. I can add multiple layers to darken up the color. To assemble my card, I just put a few dots of liquid glue around that die cut area, and then I have double-sided tape around on the back of the card. And I'm layering this onto that lighter color of cardstock beneath. And this just gives a nice tone-on-tone look to that background. You can see those fun hearts that we die cut, but they don't sort of take over the card design. I'm going to put the little hand-trimmed hill on with dimensional adhesive. And then for the little dog, up at the top part of his head that will be down on the sky, I used foam adhesive, so he's at the same level as the ground, the hill that he's standing on. And I used liquid glue on his legs so that it would be sort of standing on that hill. I'm going to pop up his balloons. And I think the perspective on this stamp is so great. You really get that feeling that he's being lifted up off the ground and you're kind of up in the sky looking down on him. Just a neat way that that was illustrated. Now, excuse my head, but I had to peek over to see what I was doing. But all I'm doing is just using a fine tip black Pitt Artist pen to draw in the strings of the balloons. It's just a couple of lines there, and that's much easier than cutting them out. And I wanted you to give you a look there at that hearts all around die. That's how that works. You just lay it down on your cardstock and then run it through your die cutting machine, and it cuts out that great sort of row of hearts going up into the sky. I always save all the extra little hearts that get cut when I'm working on my projects, and I'm just using a few of those here to put down at the base of the dog. So he's just got a few little red hearts down by his feet on the hill. And then I'm also going to use some to put up in the sky. So you just continue to get that sort of explosion of hearts and love flying up into the sky. So here's a look at that finished card. I hope you enjoyed today's video. If you did, be sure to subscribe and give a thumbs up to this video. You can also connect with Penny Black on Facebook, Pinterest, Twitter, Instagram, as well as our website and blog. I'll link to all of those for you down in the YouTube description box below. And if you stay tuned here at the very end of the video are all of the supplies used in creating this card.